Hello, Panic Fest, Tricks or Treats. I'm James Wallace with Fangoria, and I'm here with two of my spooky friends, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you why they are here to talk about Halloween with me. Take it away, Stephanie.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Jens, and I do production design, but I also am a Halloween historian and anything of the macabre. I specialize in the occult as well.
And you clearly live in a museum.
Yes, full time.
Yeah, Stephanie has one of the most like insane collections of like vintage Beasel Halloween decor. So she is especially the one that deserves to be on this panel. I just love Halloween. So, Justin,
Hi, I'm Justin Beahm. I'm a producer. My company's Reverend Entertainment. We produce for Paramount Pictures, Shout Factory, a bunch of other distributors. Um, I also used to work for Trancas International Films, which is the parent company of the Halloween franchise. And so for a number of years, I was deeply involved with the Halloween universe through that series, including putting the original back in theaters in 2012. And so also Fangoria writer for many years, Famous Monsters. And so it's a broad spectrum of love for the genre and especially for Halloween.
yeah, so we are all in some respects justified in being here to talk about Halloween beyond just the fact that we all eat a lot of Halloween candy. To kick this thing off, what is your favorite Halloween candy, and like where do you stand on the candy corn controversy?
I My mom loves candy corn, so actually growing up, when I think of Halloween, I think of candy corn. How could
Yeah.
you? But my favorite, and I actually have a vintage box of it, is Butterfingers. So I'll show you guys that.
Oh, your collection just even continues into vintage Halloween candy. Wow.
Yeah, it's a
I
1950s Butterfingers box. But yeah, I like especially with collecting, I like the things that weren't meant to be collectibles. That was
Yeah.
just the marketing in the 50s, and now it's in my house.
It would not take very much to dare me to eat a 1940s Butterfinger. I would just do it for my own curiosity.
What are
uh,
we bring ourselves into? Yeah.
we'll see where we get by the end of this. What about you, Justin?
I am also a fan of the candy corn. I like the regular
Yeah,
candy corn, the pumpkins. I like those too. It always felt
yeah,
like a score because there's more
yeah.
there.
Those are great.
And I like it sounds weird, but one of the most intoxicating elements to the candy at Halloween is the smell of the bucket or your bag or
Yeah,
wherever you've collected it all
Mhm.
in, which
yeah,
is a general thing that makes me love everything
yeah,
that's in there. And those little sort of wax paper wrap things, I may pitch those to my brother when I was a
yeah.
kid, oh, here, have these.
Right.
But for the most part, I'm completely down with any candy that I'm getting. The bigger, the
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, Reese's. I'm glad that we all can agree on candy corn. I don't understand the people that consider candy corn to be trash. Interestingly enough, though, candy corn, I found out when doing some research, was like originally like it was marketed as like chicken feed. Like that, it was like candy corn, like how you feed chickens corn.
Yes.
So apparently people have always had an aversion to candy corn, but I don't feel like you're a true Halloween fan unless you love candy corn. But kind of segueing into that, like talk about your personal experiences with Halloween. Like what was your origin story with Halloween? What made you first fall in love with it, whether it be the movies or the traditions? Like what was your gateway into Halloween?
I grew up in a very conservative home, religious home. And so we weren't allowed to participate in like normal trick or treating. Like I wasn't allowed to be anything scary. So I was like a mustache toting pirate for multiple years in a row because I love pirates, and I guess that was cleared. But from that moment on, as an adult, I will never be anything cutesy. I will always, every single year, be something scary. So that's my own tradition that I now have, is that I can't be anything that's not gruesome. But
I
yeah.
love that. You're just like alternating between pirate and hobo,
Yes.
which was just the same costume for you. What about you, Justin?
And I like that piracy is cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
your parents are like, that's fine. But
Yeah.
when it comes to
Right.
being a zombie or
Yeah.
something, yeah, forget about it.
No.
No.
Yeah, for
No.
me,
If
I also grew up it was a Catholic household, and it wasn't really frowned upon. My mom was actually, she loves decorating, and she collects Department 56 houses. I don't know if you know those Snow Village and all.
yeah.
And so she has the full run of every season, every holiday, all these houses. And so over the years, the house would transition along with the leaves and everything into a sort of Halloween town inside there. That
That's
was
so
a
cool.
hugely influential thing for my brother and I. And she was always very supportive of our artwork that we want to put up. I mean, it's the one time a year she wanted to see it. Was it Christmas or Halloween? They never shied away from us staying out longer at night when we wanted to, keep on a few more blocks. And I grew up here in Iowa, which is really, if you think about what Haddonfield is supposed to be, every town USA, that was totally my upbringing. In these safe neighborhoods where we could walk for the whole night, be safe. Almost every single house had their light on. I really did grow up in that environment. So it was a community thing here as much as it was a personal thing.
Yeah, it's like a Hollywood dreamland. Yeah, I think for me, it was traditions and holiday traditions were always really big in my family. My mom always made a big deal out of every holiday, but especially Halloween. And, I grew up in a family that loves movies. And so I grew up a monster kid and a movie kid. And Halloween was just such a celebration of all that we kind of celebrated year round. But I remember I went to an elementary school that went all out and had this big kind of Halloween festival every year. My mom was always super involved. And the year I wanted to be Batman, it wasn't just the off the rack store-bought costume. She was making the cape out of black vinyl. And so it was that. And I think it's that same kind of thing that we are attracted to now in nostalgia, that same feeling of growing up in that kind of we all kind of grew up in the true Amblin 80s era, and we were able to live that out. And I think that segues into the movies that were special for Halloween. What were those for you? What were your your movies, whether they be movies that took place on or around Halloween or just movies that felt inherently Halloween-y to you growing up?
The story that I have about Hocus Pocus kind of plays in a little bit with the costume issue. Is my granny sent me this Halloween package in the mail one year, and it had Hocus Pocus VHS in the package. And my parents literally just dumped everything into the garbage and left the candy. And I was like, you can have the candy, but this, so I honestly, every attempt that they made, to get me to avoid loving this holiday has obviously not worked out in their favor. But I love Hocus Pocus. It's an obvious, Halloween treasure. But I think Trick or Treat, especially, I actually saw that movie on YouTube before it got bought up. Michael Dougherty posted it on there, or a fan posted it on there. And I became immediately obsessed. But I also feel like that movie is our generation's Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, I was born, but I was young when Nightmare Before Christmas was, circulating.
Yeah.
But it's getting to that point where there's so much of it that I don't want to tire of it. And I kind of feel like I'm tiring of it a little bit, and I don't want to because I love Trick or Treat. But yeah. Those are my two favorite.
Yeah. And we'll, I do want to talk more about Trick or Treat, but Justin, what were yours? What were your movies that were kind of your gateway into Halloween when you were growing up?
For me, it began with the Universal Monster Cycle. It really got kickstarted through the Crestwood House monster books. I should have brought them over so I could hold it up to the camera, but the orange books that would have King Kong or the Creature from the Black Lagoon on the cover. And there was a second series about mythological creatures and cryptozoology and stuff. But I was reading about Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman before even seeing the films, before even knowing them. And then when video stores started popping up in the area, our library started carrying tapes at one point. And the only genre stuff that they would stock were the safe movies, the Universal Monster Cycle. So intrinsically tied to Halloween are all of those movies. And I love marathoning them throughout the month of October every year. But really what cemented it for me was when I was in 5th grade and I was trick-or-treating with my friend Matt, whose parents were cool enough to let him subscribe to Fango, ironically enough. And it was contraband in my house that just wouldn't have been. That was verboten. That's like your Hocus Pocus. If a copy of Fangoria would have shown up, I probably would have been chased away with a pitchfork. But so he would sneak these copies of Fango into school, and I would be, it was the classic movie, like reading it behind your social studies book kind of thing. And that was my gateway. But one year, 5th grade, we were trick-or-treating. I was dressed as Sid Vicious. I still remember the smell of the hairspray.
Nice.
And my little leather jacket. And he was like, we have to get back by 8. We have to get back by 8. Because he wanted me to see his favorite movie. So we rushed, get back to his place, sit down in front of the TV and turn it on, and Halloween 2 began.
Oh, wow.
And it transformed my life. I was mortified. I was frozen ice sitting in that room by the time my dad came to get me. And I went home just terrified. And then several weeks later, I was at another friend's house, my buddy Al, and his brother is a big collector of film scores, novelizations, comic books, all this stuff, avid collector of everything. He had the novelization of Halloween, the first one by Curtis Richards. And then he also had the soundtrack cassette, the Carpenter soundtrack. So I asked him if I could borrow those together, because I wasn't brave enough to rent Halloween or ask my parents to rent it for me because I was terrified of seeing it. But I thought if I read it and had the music, maybe there would be maybe I would kind of get the vibe.
Oh, wow.
So actually, I read and listened to Halloween before seeing Halloween. But it all goes back to that Halloween night when I saw Halloween 2 on television.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was like humble beginnings. A lot of it was thanks to Disney. I think that for all their kind of schmaltzy Disney magic, there was a real element of Disney, from early on, like, starting with the Haunted Mansion, like that's where it all starts and ends with for me. Like riding that ride really gave me a fascination. It like really was a kind of a seed of a fascination with the paranormal and the macabre. But going into like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow from 1949, and then of course Hocus Pocus and Nightmare Before Christmas, and like everything Tim Burton. And then going beyond that, like we grew up in a really interesting time period, 80s to 90s, where it felt like there was a lot of really great like gateway horror, because I think a lot of the guys that had grown up in the previous generation were then became the storytellers. And so you had stuff like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark and, Ernest Scared Stupid, which has incredible effects in it. I don't care what anybody says. And then the Barry Sonnenfeld Addams Family and, all of that stuff felt very, it was such a gateway in, and even stuff like It's a Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and like, you mentioned John Carpenter's score, like music was a huge gateway for me, especially like the stuff from the kind of previous generations with like Bobby Boris Pickett and Zachary and like Tony and the Monstrosities, like all that stuff. There was an element of Halloween, I think, in the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, where it had this real kind of golden age. And then all the people that grown up with that started becoming the people who were making stuff in the 80s and 90s. And so it was all real, like humble beginnings, I felt and now when you rewatch that stuff, which is so much of my tradition every year, just to kind of, it's like, I feel like throughout my entire life, I'm just chasing that feeling of what Halloween felt like as a kid. And I think, movies are such a great kind of way to transport us back. What are your movies that you're watching every Halloween that are your kind of like, Stephaine, you mentioned Trick or Treat. Like, what are the movies that take place on around Halloween that you watch every year that kind of really get you in the this mood for the spooky season.
Totally. I think one that doesn't get mentioned enough is Lady in White. And
Oh yeah, that's great.
On Halloween. And I think it's such an underrated, good ghost story that has such a wonderful meaning. And if you guys have not seen Lady in White, I highly suggest it. Shout Factory, I know, just put one out. I don't remember how many years ago. I think it was 2016, and it's like impossible to find.
It's great.
$80, and I'm like, oh, gotta have it. So it's on Vudu. I'm gonna rent it. But yeah, Lady in White for me for sure is a great trick or treat Halloween kind of ghost movie for me.
That's a great one, and kind of an unsung one. Like, it's not as appreciated as it should be, but feels in the pantheon of, like, you know, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and feels like it's of that kind of Disney meets Amblin era of the 80s, and that small town. Like, it was all about just wanting to live in the small town. And Justin, I'm jealous because it sounds like you got to grow up in that small town. But what about for you? What were those movies? You mentioned Halloween 2. What else was it?
Yeah, it's wall to wall every day as I work. There's always something playing in my office.
Yeah.
The Halloween Tree is one of my favorite.
Wow. Yeah.
I love, of course, Charlie Brown that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I like the Jeff Goldblum television version of Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where he plays Ichabod. Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, is
so good.
Perfect Halloween movie. In fact,
so good.
Tattoo from that. But then we get into like Jacko, the Steve Latshaw film Jacko, which is, to the suburban experience in the 90s, there's nothing that nails it so perfectly because it was simply shot in a generic suburban Florida neighborhood in the 90s. I mean, it very much wears its era on its sleeve, but it's dripping with Halloween vibes, and the family building a sort of haunted house in their garage. So I love Jacko. I have taken to Hack-O-Lantern and Trick or Treat. Or Treat, the one you're talking about too. The list is so long now. Night of the Demons was a staple for me as a kid. Infinitely quotable. Every character is unique. Linnea Quigley, it's all so good. I just feel like now more than ever, you're talking about these creators coming into this content creation phase, and it remains a tidal wave of seasonal movies where it feels like when we were growing up, it felt rare. It felt rare to find a Halloween movie.
Yeah. It did. And it felt like for the longest time, you know, it was Halloween, you know, that was the go-to classic. And of course, you know, it is the go-to classic for a reason, but yeah, it does feel like we're in kind of a new era of gateway horror, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, like I feel like Halloween is in this kind of, it feels not that it was ever niche, but it feels maybe more appreciated now that we've grown up and we're the ones that are kind of ushering it in for the next generation. But there, you know, House with a Clock in Its Walls was great. You know, I thought both of the Goosebumps movies were pretty great. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was a pretty fun adaptation. Monster House was great. Hubie Halloween, which just dropped on Netflix, which is like ridiculous, but very old school Adam Sandler. Like, it does feel like the stuff that's coming out now is a little bit more kitschy Halloween, where the stuff that we were growing up with was like, it was just the backdrop of the stories being told. But Trick or Treat it's like the classic for all generations. It feels like grown up Goosebumps, and it just, you know, the kind of life and mythology of that movie itself, to the point that the studio didn't know what to do with it and they dumped it. And now you walk into Spirit Halloween and there's an entire section devoted to the movie, and what that's been for that movie is, I don't think anybody could have ever anticipated that movie would become this icon of Halloween. The Guest is another great one for kind of modern Halloween classics, and then Murder Party. One that doesn't get mentioned a lot for Halloween classics to me, even though it's not technically a Halloween movie, is Pumpkinhead. Like, I always think of that movie as a Halloween movie, it's a go-to. Obviously Halloween 3. I probably watch Halloween 3 more than I watch the original Halloween around Halloween. It's more of a Halloween holiday movie to me. Some other ones we didn't mention, House 2 Second Story is great. I Was a Teenage Werewolf, if you want to go back to the kind of earlier days. You mentioned Trick or Treat, like Sammy Kerr, that movie, Gene Simmons, Ozzy Osbourne, like that movie is just, it deserves more love in the
it's that rock and roll Halloween hybrid that is so crucial to our generation.
Yeah.
It really, and that was at the peak of all of that. You had Shocker and all these other metal movies, Chainsaw 3 and so on and so on.
It's really you're right. It's a perfect combination of like the satanic rock and roll with the Halloween movie.
Because parents were terrified at that time. Parents were terrified of two things. They're terrified of Satan and they're terrified of metal. And so when you combine those two things, and then you add Halloween, it becomes, I remember sitting in health class and our health teacher bringing in Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. And he had the vinyl. And the vinyl was matte black on the front, except for a shiny pentagram. And there was just like and you had to sort of move it in the light. And he walks in and he holds it up. And he says, "This is Satan." And I was just like,
there he is.
This is incredible. Yeah. What's in your basement, sir? Like to ask that guy today, now that I know. But and he had pictures of this satanic cult hut that was in town. That was some little like pallet fort that had like a pentagram and an upside down cross spray painted on it. And he's like, the Satanists are here. They're here. So you speak to the small town thing and how great it is to grow up in that. But you also have a health teacher is preaching abstinence until you're 90 and saying that Satan already lives in your pants. So
Satan does live in my pants. Trick or Treat has to be Stephanie's parents' least favorite movie because it not only deals with Satan and rock and roll, but also Halloween. We need you to sit your parents down and watch it with them. And we need like a live commentary, live reaction to Trick or Treat. Donnie Darko is a great one that I think uses Halloween in a really interesting way. The Crow, which I know is one of Stephanie and I's mutual favorite movies. And then you have movies like E.T. and Karate Kid, which were especially E.T. of that Amblin era. Spielberg, I think, had a special fondness for Halloween, even in a movie like Poltergeist, where you realize that it's like Halloween in the background. It's taking place over a period of time, which includes October, and it's never quite nodded to, but it almost says that like they are so preoccupied that normally they'd be all about Halloween, but like obviously their daughter is, kidnapped in a ghost dimension. But I want to talk about now I want to segue from those into like the actual history of the holiday and the traditions, and a lot of like what we see in those movies, especially movies like Halloween 3 and Trick or Treat, are based on the mythology around Halloween and the history of it, and all of those things that we think of with Halloween, from costumes and trick-or-treating and jack-o'-lanterns, come from a very real place, and most of the time have way weirder origin stories than you would ever anticipate. So what's kind of your own experience with like the history of a holiday? And Stephanie, I expect you to fully speak to this above me and Justin.
Sure. I'm really good when you ask me specific questions. So if there's like a specific thing you want me to, comment on, just I'm better with like question details instead of going into broad spectrum.
Yeah.
Whether it be decorations or how it came to America, or where it originated. It originally originated in Ireland, and the Celts and paganism in the 7th century, is as far as it dates back.
Right.
And missionaries were our only form of taking what was only a spoken word tradition and then kind of continuing it. And something that I actually learned somewhat recently is King James, who wrote the Bible, the modern Bible. He became obsessed with witches. And so that was the first time that witches and Halloween kind of became fused together. Is he was trying to separate from the Catholic Church. And so as like a political and religious stunt, he wanted to really ostracize and put those people amongst for many women on a pedestal of, you do not do this. And that's where the puritanical transfer came over to America. And with that, a lot of the Irish traditions of Samhain and the paganism traditions, it's a lot of like trickster type stuff. So that's where trick or treat comes in. Is a lot of the kids back in the early Victorian era were just, I don't know if we're allowed to cuss at Panic Fest, but for lack of better words, they were just fucking shit up all the time. And that's where Devil's Night comes from in The Crow.
Yeah.
Kids were just burning buildings down and trashing houses. And so the townsmen and people and the mayors were getting together and just like, we need to figure out how we can't lose money on this holiday anymore. So they basically started this book. Denison is one of the earliest companies that found a way to kind of market the things that they had for sale as far as decorations go. So this is my prized possession in my collector's abyss of Halloween, and it's called the Bogey Book. And this one's from 1924, but they started as early as, I think, 1913. But basically, it's a book that shows you different costumes and decorations that they would have for sale. And let me find the good page. But basically, that's kind of what it would look like. And then you could, in the very back, basically place your purchase. But that was kind of how they were trying to allow the kids to, instead of wrecking the towns, you're allowed to go door to door and get treats, and there's music and people will jump out. And that's kind of where it slowly started, from just the in-home holiday, because a lot of it was just bobbing for apples, baking pies, giving it to your neighbor. So there wasn't much to do until they brought it out to the streets and said, okay, let's make this a town thing. I can't for the life of me find, there we go. So this is
wow,
the 1924 version of what their costumes were. And my
God, I love those costumes.
Weird guy.
Yeah, is that Nosferatu?
I don't know. But yeah,
I want to go to that party.
So this is probably one of my favorite things that I have.
No, that's incredible. Yeah, you mentioned witches. It's funny because as you see on this shirt, like the things that you think of in terms of iconography or Halloween are witches and ghosts, jack-o'-lanterns and skeletons. Those are like the four main things. The ghost connection and kind of history there is interesting because a lot of the cultures with Halloween or All Hallows Eve or, whatever it was called in different cultures, like
All Saints Day.
Yeah. They believed that it was the one night that the dead could come back and speak to the living. And so costumes comes out of the idea that you could be walking around the streets and encounter a ghost. And if you were wearing a costume, maybe the ghost wouldn't recognize you, which I love. I think that's such a fun kind of origin for that. And I think that like you see as different cultures had their own version of Halloween, it was kind of different for different ones. The bedsheet ghost is a costume, which is maybe the most classic Halloween costume. And my all-time favorite was from the fact that when bodies were laid down to rest, they would cover them with these shrouds. And then if people didn't have money for shrouds, they would cover them with sheets. And so it was this idea that the body would get up and then it would just be wearing the sheet. Yeah. It's like the most classic spooky iconography. And so I love that all these kind of traditions that we've carried on, like they all have their origins in something really interesting. And a lot of it, interestingly enough, is religious. Like Halloween, then after the Satanic Panic, and, you know, it became this thing where like churches wouldn't even call it Halloween. They would have fall festivals. And like you mentioned, your parents were just so against Halloween, but really like a lot of them have very like spiritual religious origins. So I always found that to be fascinating. The other thing that I found to be fascinating was the origin of the jack-o'-lantern, which started with the Irish too. If you think you are good at carving a jack-o'-lantern, you should try and carve a turnip, because that's what the original jack-o'-lantern was. And you should look at pictures of the original jack-o'-lanterns, because they are terrifying. I've never seen something so terrifying as an original ancient jack-o'-lantern as a turnip. Yeah. So I would encourage everybody to look that up. But what else, Justin? Are there ones that really like stick out to you, or if you kind of know about the history of the holiday?
I think that the thing that's always been fascinating to me is the mythology around it here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And the superstitions that come along with it. And then also the threatening nature that the night has absorbed from people creating scare stories for their kids about, oh, there's, you know, the candy apples with razors in them, or poisoned candy, which really was born out of one guy doing it one night.
Yeah.
And it was a targeted attack, really. It wasn't some random event that it had been perpetrated. So, but that became this general acceptance of there being a certain danger with the night, which I think helps with the excitement of being a kid and being out there, because it is a rite of passage for us. It's a rite of passage to make it through trick-or-treating. And especially when we got to the age where we could go by ourselves or with our family or whatever, not by ourselves, but, you know, with friends and family like that. It's the first time I remember being left alone out of the house at night, really, short of being in the backyard. Yeah. So there's already that sort of mile marker in life associated with it. But then when you add in the danger, we survived another one, kind of, it's like at the end. And there's also this sort of melancholy that comes with that too, because like at the end of Great Pumpkin, when Charlie Brown's sitting there talking to Linus and he's like, well, another year is gone. You're like, I don't want to see the day after.
Yeah.
I don't want to, no, I want to live in this. We need to swim in this for longer. And so anyway, all of that sort of fear mongering around it, I think is super fascinating. And there's an excellent book it's written by David J. Scull called Death Makes a Holiday. It's all about Halloween and its cultural presence. And it gets really deep into this stuff for anybody who wants to dig in on it. I can't recommend his books highly enough anyway, but this one in particular is a must read for anyone looking to dive deeper on Halloween.
Yeah. I think,
I agree.
No, go ahead.
It feels like Halloween was the one night for, and even historically, for you to let loose.
Yeah.
Be a trickster and go wreak havoc. And from the start of it being a holiday, it has always been countered with, this might happen. You might die. You might get stolen. You know, El Cucuy is going to come get you. So it's like, there's so, I agree with you. It's interesting how it was started as a night to kind of let loose. And then it's over time always been a night to fear.
Yeah. It's fascinating that, it started abroad and it's an ancient holiday, 2,000 years old, and has all these roots in religion and spirituality. And then it comes over here and immigrants bring it over. And then it's really Americanized and turned into something that like is repressive. And if anything, I mean, the fact that these ancient cultures had the wherewithal to understand of like celebrating the dead and celebrating ancestry and having this one night where, we could kind of be our most monstrous selves. And I think I don't know. We're not so advanced or modernized when you think of it that way. And I think once it did get in the hands of kind of, once it really became Americanized, like once it became more about, people always are critical of Halloween, saying it was like started by the candy companies and stuff like that. Like, but I think over the last, it feels really more recent that like it's kind of been taken back. Like, I think there was a weird period there where it felt really like shamed, like it felt like a shamed holiday, and it felt like it's really been taken back and celebrated. And Justin, I love how you mentioned like, there's nothing like the lead up to Halloween, and then there is nothing like November 1st, which is the saddest day of the year. Like, I don't care how you feel about Christmas, like nothing is like Halloween as a kid. So I love that we still feel like, I think it's important to acknowledge all those traditions, because I feel like that's the whole idea of carrying them on, celebrating them. And I think it's so cool that we've kind of taken Halloween back, and we still kind of honor, those ancient roots that it has. Anything else on the traditions before we move on? I mean, I would encourage people, we could spend hours talking about the different origins of all the different, traditions and different cultures. So I would encourage people to go read up on their own if they're really interested in it. But if there's any other ones you want to get in there, we can stay on it for a little bit if we want to.
Well, Stephaine, I'd like to ask you about when it came to the US. When did it really start getting commercialized here? Can you speak to that and how that occurred? Because it's not an obvious leap to go from something that comes from this kind of point of origin to it being a marketed thing. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Trick-or-treating actually started in the early 30s. So like 1933 is when you really started seeing kids go door to door, and it was known, in the town that they would have stuff ready for the kids. Then World War II happened. And that's where it kind of took a little bit of a dip. So it really started to kind of do well and skyrocket into this, capitalism did honestly help, with the decorations and the candy companies. And then World War II, it took its dip because sugar was needed. And basically the 1950s is when it exploded. And that was all of the marketing was towards, housewives and their kids and Ben Cooper. It was the first time that you could buy a costume instead of having to make it for your kid. And so that was honestly the mid-century. That's when it completely, exploded into what we're used to now. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think after that, you look at the 60s and 70s, like, I have this weird fascination with all the very odd Halloween safety videos of the 70s. Like, that's a real fun YouTube black hole to go down. But I think it's the 70s and when religion kind of crossed over with this fear of the supernatural and occultism. And, I think what we're seeing on the parallel side of what's going on in horror during that time and the types of horror movies that are being made. And then once you get into the 80s with, the Satanic Panic, it's interesting because, like, I was born in 84. I grew up around that time. I have such a nostalgia for that time. I don't really think back and think of this fear of Halloween. But Stephaine, you grew up in a totally different environment where it feels like that was the kind of thing that you grew up in, like this fear of Halloween from a religious standpoint.
And I have since then, every probably life choice that I've ever made is question that, like, why is it that way? And
Yeah.
you kind of already have been touching on it, but spiritualism has been kind of huge. Every 20 or 30, there's the spiritualism of when seances were huge in the Victorian era and the Fox sisters, and there was a lot of charlatans involved, but it was huge. And then you kind of hit into the 30s and 40s, and it was, men coming home from the war, and the Ouija board was becoming more and more popular because women wanted to speak to, the men who had lost their lives overseas.
Yeah.
Then we have the Satanic Panic, like you're talking about, in the 60s and 70s. And honestly, if you notice right now, witches are huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, The Craft and Hocus Pocus.
Yes. And Sabrina. Yeah. I actually love that Netflix
and
show.
Sabrina. Yeah, Sabrina.
So it's interesting that you kind of see every couple of decades, there's this resurgence of, let's delve into that darker side. And why is our society saying that this is wrong, or outcasts, or
yeah. Well, and I think it's a little bit of what we were talking about earlier. I think we're all within a certain age range where we grew up with a certain kind of counterculture to what our parents grew up with. And they tried to kind of force that upon us in some instances, like your own personal experience. But now those people are the creators, and there's such a fascination with, horror is reached a mainstream I don't know if we've ever seen before. And even, things that growing up were the kind of counterculture, like even goth culture. And, there's such a nostalgia for things that growing up, like we were probably all shoved in lockers and persecuted for. Those are the cool things now. And a lot of those movies have been the kind of gateway for, I think, modern youth culture into that stuff. So stuff like witchcraft and witches, and like even the way it's worked itself into the vernacular of pop culture, like is I feel like we all suffered in a bit so that the current generation could like be themselves freely. And so it'll be really interesting to see how, with Halloween connected to all that, it continues to evolve, because I think Halloween is now at a point, I can't remember a time in my life where Halloween was ever as kind of celebrated and mainstream as it is now. It feels at a real high point. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next generation grows up with that and their idea of Halloween.
I was Rhonda from Trick or Treat growing up, and I'm just like, I'm Samhain. Like that was, and she gets made fun of in that movie, and I totally was that kid going to a religious school. And so now it's like I'm adult Rhonda, and it's cool. And I would love to pave that way for.
Yeah. I think The Craft and The Craft Remake are two perfect examples of like The Craft in the 90s was really representative of it's such a time capsule of a movie. But now you look at the Craft remake that literally just came out yesterday, and like looking at who those girls are today and who that movie is trying to speak to, like it's totally different. So I think that's great. I think the fact that there's a fascination with the paranormal and the occult and horror and all of the roots and traditions of Halloween, and like the fact that it can be celebrated in a mainstream way, like coming from the fact that it was once, so persecuted, and all of those things are so persecuted. Like that's great. I think that, we're really at a high point for Halloween now. Justin, anything? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say something about The Craft. Like, I actually agree with you. I wasn't like ecstatic when I first saw the trailer, but then I kind of molded over and I realized, like, you're totally right, James. I don't ever want to gatekeep the weird just because I love 90s grunge looking nostalgic, that I grew up with. It's all about, like, those movies are all about women persecution. And it's like, I would never want to stand in the way of girls, of this generation getting something out of a film. So I 100% back.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's move on.
I'm going back and forth. Justin, did you want to ask me so bad?
No, that's great. I mean, you're the expert. It's so fascinating. I love.
Was there any other questions? Because it's a wealth of things that I have. If you wanted to add more, I don't know, details or questions for decorations or traditions. No.
we should talk about your huge collection of flame retardant costumes that you
retarded on it, which I don't like that word, but it actually says that on the 1950s because they didn't really understand what that word meant, and it was horribly misprinted. But yeah,
they're scary in a different way these days. Like you had all the, I mean, the plastic masks are now so like iconic and collectible, and those have been reissued. But like those costumes, those early costumes from Halloween were like just so. There you go. Yeah, those are. Oh, I love those so much. Look at that.
My prized possession, my Frankenstein Ben Cooper mask and costume.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Well, this is a great segue. Like what's your all-time, I want to talk about our own, you know, we just came from talking about the broad traditions and the history of Halloween. What are your own traditions? Let's talk about costumes first, since we've just like, what's your all-time favorite or greatest Halloween costume?
Am I going first?
Go first. Yeah.
Let me grab a part of the costume. And
you still have it? Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Hold on.
My parents didn't save any of that stuff. I wish they would.
I think Stephaine just saved all this stuff.
I love those old Ben Coopers. I just did.
Yeah, they re-released them as these, like, they're giant. They're like this big and they hang on the wall. Those are great.
Yes. I do not have the space, or I would have them all. And I tend to be somewhat of an elitist when it comes to the vintage stuff. Like I would rather have the vintage stuff, which is
you're such a purist. I was in a spirit and they re-released all the Ben Cooper masks and I was like, Stephaine, how cool are these? They're only like $10. And she was like, I just felt through emojis her judgment and snobbery and snubbing me.
Oh my God. Okay. So my favorite costume was actually the one that I did. Was it last year? I think it was last year or the year before. But one of my favorite movies is Black Sunday with Barbara. Yeah. And I had
so good.
This woman custom makes these masks, and she actually for years worked for Guar. So she was Guar's like custom fabricator.
It's incredible.
Yes. So she did this, and I did the whole makeup and the whole outfit. So that was my favorite costume, was Barbara Steele from Black Sunday.
You killed it. That was so good. What about you, Justin? What's your all-time favorite costume you've done?
Oh man. I remember as a kid going as Casper. Thought I had this great Casper costume. It was a Ben Cooper. It was the same thing.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
I had the Lone Ranger at some point.
Oh, that's good.
My mom never had us make costumes, which I kind of wish she would have helped breed that into us, my brother and I. But we loved going hunting because every year it was this new thing. It was the excitement of going to the store and seeing.
Yeah. Because
you had no idea what you're going to run into. And at that time, there were timeless characters. Like Casper wasn't relevant when I was a kid, really.
Right.
It's not like he was on TV or movies or something.
Yeah.
It's probably more relevant now than it was then.
Yeah.
But still, it was this timeless thing that was a cornerstone of what you saw in the aisles at the Five and Dime or wherever you were getting them from.
Yeah.
I just produced the Blu-ray for Haunt. My friends Scott and Brian.
Yeah.
They made this movie Haunt, and the villains in it wear Ben Cooper style mold masks, and the whole concept behind the film, part of it is that the bad guys want you lift the mask. Usually in Halloween and all these other movies, the mask hides the human. But in this film, they unmask, and you see that it's actually in most cases more grotesque than what they were showing you in the front, which is kind of a backwards play on what that mask means. But that nostalgia for them is met in this kind of scenario with how they're scarier than a lot of what's out there today. Those over the head. My buddies run a company called Trick or Treat Studios that make the absolute best masks in the world. And in fact, they have the Haunt license that's going to be coming out pretty soon. But these things are so real now. They look so good. As a kid, there wasn't a good Michael Myers mask. There just straight up wasn't. And so that created this whole fan world of fan-made masks that's been lasting forever. And so that was really interesting. And it just like with movies, it's a golden age right now for people who are into the modern collectibles.
Yeah.
And you can live in the film. You're buying the jacket that the ambulance driver wore in Halloween 2. You know what I mean? Haddonfield Memorial Hospital stuff. So I didn't ever have any real elaborate costumes when I was little, but I will say that nothing beats those classic, in my mind, those classic Ben Cooper kits with the cellophane on the front of the box. And every time I'm in any kind of antique store or anything like that, I'm always hunting for that box.
Yeah.
Shelf somewhere, because I just love them so much.
They're never there because they're never there because Stephanie buys them all.
This is my other one. It's from.
So good. Just the layers of color, like the different shades of green.
Oranges too over the different years. Like some were neon orange, especially in the 70s, and then it's more muted Sorry.
It has been cool to see those come back, and it has just in a broader sense to have a store like Spirit that's such a celebration of Halloween. Oh, so good.
Great.
But you're right, Justin. Now that pop culture is such an industry, now that Halloween is such an industry, now that horror is such an industry, now that cosplay is such an industry, like there's something different about Halloween costumes now. And in some sense, the accessibility to being like, I want the exact outfit that walked right off screen and I want to be able to wear it. Like, it allows you as a fan to be more connected to that movie, and that's great. But there was something about just going to the store and buying your shitty off the rack costume, and that was like good enough for you, or your mom would make it, like my Batman costume. But like, I think for me too, like it always goes back to the classics. Like to me, there's nothing better than the Bedsheet Ghost. Like it's just so simple, so iconic. It's just the most comfortable costume. You never have to wear your jacket with it, which is the worst thing that your parents could ever make you do, is like you're a superhero and then you're like, Mom, Superman doesn't wear a jacket. And she's like, yeah, well, you don't have heat vision, so you have to wear your jacket, which makes me really sad for kids this year that they're all going to have to wear masks over their maskless costumes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the vampire, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, like all those costumes were just so. Justin, you mentioned Universal Monsters, like those were the classics to me growing up. And then you get to a certain age where you're a little iffy on Halloween costumes, like, because you love it internally, but all your friends are kind of growing out of it. And then you take whatever sports uniform was that year and you make yourself like a dead baseball, like little leaguer or whatever. Like you're basically Max and Hocus Pocus at that point. I'm trying to think of my favorite one. Probably my favorite recent one. You mentioned Black Sunday. Like I did a gender bent Lydia Dietz, who was just, to me, like the character growing up that made me feel like it was okay to be weird. Mm-hmm. And I love her so much beyond just the fact that, Winona Ryder and, first crush. And so that one was like a huge hit and I loved that one. That was a really fun one. But yeah, man, I've come up with some. I also was creative director for Alamo Drafthouse for like 6 years. So it became this thing where I was wearing costumes all the time for all these events that we were doing. So then you get to Halloween and you're like, oh, what am I going to do? I've already worn all my costumes. So do you guys have costumes planned for this year? This has to be the weirdest Halloween year yet.
I don't.
No, which is saying a lot for you. That's a lot.
I just live in it. And I think that's actually what I'm excited about is, even though I'm a very extroverted person, I like not being forced to necessarily be anywhere. Yeah. And it's probably the first one that I'll be like fully watching a marathon on the entire day, having all my treats. Like I got this new trick or treat basket that I'm really excited about.
There you go.
No kids come to my door. It's all for me.
What about you, Justin? Do you have plans for 2020, the weirdest Halloween? The entire year has just been a horror movie. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I think this year, one of the things that I've liked is people have been seeming to count down to Halloween less, which is always a bit of an anxiety inducing thing for me.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, 28 days to Halloween. I'm like, okay, well, slow down.
Yeah.
Let's hold on, please.
Yeah.
So for me, it always begins in August. And I'm a
Yeah.
very seasonal watching. I like to watch when it snows. Storm of the Century's going in, The Shining's going in. Like I'm very much into moody. I absorb the environment. Yeah. And so I'm ready though. Like there's a summer camp movie cutoff in usually around August, early August. And I'm diving right into all the Halloween stuff. And
great.
So I've been swimming in it for so long already. And my son, we're not sure yet about trick-or-treating. They are saying that it can happen here. You technically can, but half the town has no decorations up for the first time in my lifetime that I'm seeing streets that are just dark at night now. There's even a few houses with Christmas lights already up. And I want to knock on the door and say, just make them orange for a few more days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
it's been great. It's been great to see the ingenuity of people this year with not wanting to let Halloween die. And like, I'm sure you guys, Stephaine, you're the one who posted it, the Halloween candy slide where it can, it's like a tube that's at the door and the person can just put the candy down and it slides right into the kid's bag, or like somebody else came up with like a
blow dart. Like I thought I'm like, how does that work?
just a slingshot with Jolly Ranchers. Yeah. But there's like a Halloween zip line somebody came up with. So Halloween is one of those holidays that feels like, no matter what life throws at us, like there are people that are not going to let it die, So what are your traditions that you're still sticking to this year? Your yearly, annual Halloween traditions that you're still doing this year that you do every year, that kind of, you mentioned your marathons. Do you guys have any others?
What I appreciate, I'm in Los Angeles. So what I love about my city is that it actually hasn't quieted down. It's almost as if, especially in Burbank, I live in Burbank, which is literally what Tim Burton based Edward Scissorhands off of. And so it really is this small, cute community that all the animators from all the different cartoon places have moved in and made it weird and artsy and fun. And I used to own a business on Magnolia called Mystic Museum, and there's Halloween Town. And so it's actually kind of like a little goth town. So literally all the houses have been immaculately decorated because a bunch of people have time on their hands. And I did get a chance to go to the Bite LA, which is this drive-through immersive experience where monsters will like awkwardly bring this basket up to your your car, and you like put this menu in and they bring you random food and it's all decorated. It was fun. It really I just appreciate that people are still trying and doing new creative things to keep people excited and happy.
Yeah. The drive boo stuff has been so great. Like it really has, especially with we've all been put through a lot this year, but Justin, you mentioned you have a kid. I have a 6 about to be 7-year-old. Her birthday's 2 days after Halloween. Like Halloween is such a thing between the both of us, and like school has been so weird. Everything has been so weird for kids. So it's like, it's great to see that there are certain things that it's like, we will not let Halloween die this year. Like, what are some of the traditions you do with your son, or some of the stuff that you're doing this year for Halloween?
It definitely is weird here because the kids, they have been pushed back into school.
Yeah.
We have a very reckless governor, unfortunately, who forces our hand with this as parents. And so, for example, there's no costume parade this year.
Yeah.
They're doing a pajama day instead on Friday, which is cool. He's excited, but it's not the same. And for me, nothing as a parent, like you're just going to those school events, especially that one, were so cute because every kid is so pumped, like craning the halls, waiting, hoping mom and dad are there. There's a real magic to that. And that's one of the things that I remember from being a kid too, in my Halloween parades, where we come out in front of the school in this sort of horseshoe out by the parking lot, and the parents are snapping pictures, and it's this moment, it's this big thing. And so what we're doing is we're we are trying to create that at home. We're trying to create little hunts, like scavenger hunts. We have when the kids, my girlfriend and her kids also, we did a pumpkin decorating the other day, and so we lined them up in this room, shut off the lights, and I had some glow in the dark things and some glow sticks all around, and we did like a Halloween parade through our pumpkins that we had just made and also seen, but it was a special deal then. And then also drive-ins. This is the resurgence of the drive-in as a result of COVID is one of the most beautiful things that has happened. And so there's a drive-in relatively near here that we frequented. And last Saturday, Hocus Pocus, actually, there's a racetrack in Cedar Rapids right near here. And they have huge building that they have a lot of events in normally. But they put up these gigantic screens on the side of it. And the parking lot, they had everyone line up in parks. They had a sort of pop-up drive-in, and they showed Hocus Pocus.
It's great.
And it was last Saturday. And so you have this haunted attraction co-sponsoring with their actors on their, like the Slenderman actors on his stilts. And you got the witches and all these cool activities. You're in your car, so it's safe. You're distanced, but you still get some of that same experience of being able to do something outside of just sit at home and watch movies, which is great. And we'll be doing plenty of it, but still. That's how we're trying to keep it alive.
Yeah, Disney just like Repertory has really had a crazy resurgence now across all theaters, beyond just, your Alamo Draft Houses and your theaters that would always kind of play movies like that. Like there's been a real resurgence because of the lack of new releases. And so Hocus Pocus, I think I read recently, was like one of the highest grossing movies, for the first time. Like, so it's been great, like across the board to see stuff like that, and everything that people are doing to not let Halloween die. And it's a real special thing to finally be a parent, and all of these traditions and movies and everything we've talked about over the last hour, to get to then share that with your kid. And parents were such a part of, for better or worse, like, such a part of your Halloween experience. Like, so then to kind of be able to either get to share that in the way you grew up with it, or kind of like, rewrite some of the wrongs like that you grew up with. Like, so it's been great to see like that people are not letting that go away this year, and not just saying like, well, it's 2020, Halloween's a wash, because Halloween lives in our heart, guys. It can never die. It will always be here. That is why we have been here for the last hour to talk about it. Also, fun fact to take us out on, you should go outside on Halloween because it's safe and you can be socially distanced, and most costumes do involve a mask. But also, this is the first Halloween in 19 years to have a full moon. Did you guys know this?
Oh, yeah.
Full moons on Halloween are pretty rare. The last time we had a full moon, October 31st, 2001. And before that, it was 1955. And the next one won't occur until 2039. And in 21st century, we'll only see 6 full moons on October 31st. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know if we're going to really make it to 2096 to see that 6th one. So we should appreciate this one. Perfect year for a werewolf costume. And hey, that's a mask. So also, I read another weird fact, and I saved this. We already talked about candy. I would have thought that Reese's are the quintessential Halloween candy to me, besides candy corn. Skittles are the most popular Halloween candy.
Interesting.
Stop buying Skittles for people. I don't know what you're doing buying Skittles.
Down with Skittles.
Down with Skittles. Reese's all the way. I just want to go out telling people stop buying Skittles. Yeah. You could put tiny razor blades in each Skittle. They're unsafe. Skittles are, if we really want to hate on something beyond candy corn, it's Skittles.
I love Skittles.
I like them too, man, especially since they made green apple in there.
I'm really against, I think it's a conspiracy by Big Skittle. And I think that's fake news. Skittles, there's no way it's a top Halloween candy. So
it's the best.
Go outside, go outside, enjoy the full moon, and do not buy Skittles. But anything anything you guys want to say to take us out on before we end this?
Plug your stuff.
Yeah. Everybody go around and where can people find you and follow you and see this year's Halloween posts?
Great. So you can follow me on Instagram. I am morning_talks, which is morning, not like morning.
You only post in the morning. You only post in the morning.
I do. I only post. Yeah. But so yeah, I'm going to be doing a lot of like historical little webisodes on there as well. So if you want to learn more about anything of the macabre, including Halloween history, I'm going to have little episodes on there for you guys to look at. And then also I own a company with my boyfriend. It's called Holy Hangman. And you can check out our stuff at holyhangman.com. And it's gorgeous. And we have a lot of cool shirts on there. A lot of spoopy old vintage imagery is what we're inspired by. So yeah.
Justin, what about you? Where can people find you?
Same on social media. It's just my name. My last name is Beahm, and you can find me there or at justinbeahm.com. I have a number, if you don't mind, a couple of upcoming releases.
Yeah, plug away.
Releases. We just had from Shout Factory, the Friday the 13th box set that I was a part of. That just landed, as did Terror in the Isles. The Haunting, it just came out from Paramount as part of the Paramount Presents. This is the Jan de Bont Haunting.
Yeah.
Haunt, as I mentioned, just landed this last week. And available for pre-order right now are The Golden Child from Paramount, Event Horizon, and there's a bunch of upcoming titles that we haven't announced yet that are really exciting. And my podcast is the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. And I interview people I just had Andrea from Room Oregon, for example. So people from all different walks in the business, and that's everywhere podcasts are found. But yeah, the best way to keep up is through social media. So if you track me down, shoot me a message. I would love to hear from you.
Rad. And I'm James Wallace. Easiest thing is probably Instagram, James_Wallace. And then of course you can follow Fangoria at Fangoria on all the socials. Yeah, thank you guys so much for being with us. I know we could just sit around and talk about Halloween for hours, and also what better do we have to do? We're not going anywhere. And thank everyone for tuning in to this chat, as well as everything for the Panic Fest Tricks or Treats. panicfest.com/tricks for full programming details. There's a ton of great stuff that these guys have put together. Thanks to Panic Fest again for having us. Love all those guys. And they've, talking about ingenuity and innovation during this time, like they've really done some great virtual events, and exactly what we were talking about, like just a full onslaught of programming, all themed around Halloween for people to kind of tune into over 2 days, 13 plus new feature films, 25 plus shorts, and 13 plus special events just like this. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. And with that, I hope everyone has a happy, spooky Halloween and stays safe and socially distanced. And now your computers are cursed. Stephaine lives inside your computer now.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween.